know that virtual coaching has become more competitive than ever. NASM's got you covered with our virtual coaching course. NASM's virtual coaching course provides a complete solution to help you translate your services into a successful virtual platform. This course will give you the tools to build and operate a sustainable virtual business model. The formats may be different, but you're still delivering fitness training and effective behavioral coaching. That doesn't change even if you can't be in the same physical space as your clients. The truth is, this is the way to reach more clients and expand your reach and impact. There's never been a better time to carve out your very own virtual space, and NASM is here to help. Welcome to NASM's virtual coaching.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NASM Master Instructor Roundtable Live. I am Prentice, and I'm back. And I'm here, as always, with Wendy Batts and Marty Miller. How are you doing today?
Fantastic.
Great. Thank you, Prentice.
And as always, keeping it together for us is Greg behind the scenes, and I can see him saluting now. So today, what we're going to talk about is doing corrective exercise using new modalities. And speaking of new modalities, I was just off at a conference learning the best sonic screwdriver to choose for my toolbox. So I'm hoping to implement some of that knowledge now. The master who taught it to me was, he was really good. So I hope I can get the right tool in the future. And before we get started, I'm going to be asking questions throughout this webinar. And the reason is we're going to have a pilot CES virtual workshop. And I want to invite some of you who've been listening, hanging out with us on these webinars to join us for those two dates, one of those two dates in December. So if you answer a question correctly, you will blurt it out in the chat, and Greg will capture your name and email, and I'll be sure to hold on to that. And when we're ready to get you registered for that CES virtual workshop, I will get you in there. And before we go, the first question is, name that television show reference that I opened with. This is really gonna test your useless knowledge. So go ahead, write in the chat box, name that television show reference, and then we'll get started. So Wendy, talk to us about corrective exercise using new modalities.
Yes, well, Marty and I have done, all of us actually have done multiple webinars since March, just talking about corrective exercise. And, we often use the same exercises commonly when we're talking about like the activation and integration. And so, there's so many different tools out there on the market that are super helpful. But, when we go into this, you want to keep in mind that, every client is different. And so the things that we discussed today, we don't want you to think, well, because we talked about it, that it's okay to implement. It really depends on your client, their movement patterns, and how well they're able to control whatever it is that you're going to have them use. So we just kind of wanted to spice it up a little bit. And again, we say new modalities. Some of the stuff that's out there has been out there. And, some of the things that we didn't include in the webinar, we're not saying are not good tools. It's just, you may be a little more familiar with some of those things. So that's basically what we're going to talk about over the next hour or so.
Yeah, and the point of that is, and you brought up several good points as always, but the point of that is you can use anything and implement it into the corrective exercise process, so long as you follow the principles of corrective exercise, which I think we're going to talk about next. So let's talk about what you should think about when you're doing corrective exercise. Let's take a look at the next slide for Wendy's rules.
Well, actually, these are actually more Marty's rules too. But however, these are common rules that we all pretty much live by. So, if we go and show the next slide, you guys will see, the three rules that we talk about very often, as you know. And the first one is always do no harm. And that's a big one, just because, again, with our scope of practice, we are not there to treat pain. We're supposed to help with discomfort. We're supposed to help people achieve specific goals, as well as making sure that we get them moving efficiently and feeling better overall, so they perform better, look better, and yeah. So that's a big one. And then, Marty, you want to talk about number 2?
Sure. So, going back to like Wendy saying, is first, let's make sure we don't screw anything up. And then what I see, this is the way it is. But what I saw a lot of trainers do when I came up with this is they would kind of just go right into what the client wanted. And, so the goal here is we want to give them what they want. But due to the fact that we're NASM, evidence-based, and we have all these assessments, we still want to give them what they need. And we're going to talk, and I think, Wendy, you and I have done a good job during all these roundtables of spicing it up and giving them, hey, here's the science, but here's how you can trick people into thinking they're doing something maybe different. So we don't want it to be boring. We don't want it to be too regimented. We want it to be exciting. We want them to think they have, they're getting exactly what they want. But at the end of the day, when you watch any of us train, we're still always following the underlying science based on what they need. And then we're just blending it to how they either want to communicate, the type of exercises they like to do or not do, or the tools they like to use. So that's really where that comes from.
Well, absolutely. And if you look at the new CPT template, even, we actually have a section listed now that's new that says it's the client's choice. And like you said, we know what they need based on the assessments, because as you're going to see in the next slide, the assessments dictate everything. And so we're obviously going to make sure that we are giving them, like you said, what they want. But then we do have that little bitty section that if they are all about the gun show and they want to do buys and tries, and we know that we did a ton of different things that incorporated that in their program already, but they specifically want to do the elbow flexion and extension, we're going to add that in there too. So, and then of course, the last point, you got to have fun. If you're not having fun with your clients, they're not coming back. They want to come have an awesome session, get their butt kicked, and at the same time, end up, achieving their goals long-term.
Yeah. And Wendy, if I can jump in here, I think where this webinar came to me a couple of years ago, I did this as a live workshop at Optima, and we had a lot of fun. And the reason I really wanted to do this was because at the time, I think corrective exercise, I hate to say it this way, but to some people was a little stale because they only saw anterior tib one way. They only saw posterior tib one way. In the book, we're just showing you the movements that you need to create the resistance against to strengthen it, to get to create that better movement. It's up to you as the fitness professional to make it engaging. And again, going back to NASM's your toolbox, what tools are you good at? I promise you, Prentice, he'd change a light bulb with a kettlebell if he could, right? Those are his favorite tools. I'm not as versed with kettlebells, but I might use something else. So again, it doesn't change what you need to do to work an anterior tib or a posterior tib or mid trap, low trap. So this is where, again, getting corrective exercise to have a little more life to it, making it that targeted warm up, making it a fun workout, really, I think we had a great time with it. I'd love to bring it back I'm hoping Optima 2021 is the live workshops. But, I think that's where the fun can really come through when people maybe underestimate what you can do with corrective exercise.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. And those are all really good points, and back to giving them what they want. I like to bench and do my Zercher squats on Monday, just like every other person. But if I'm a good client, I'll listen to both of you tell me the best way to get there. So it comes back to being able to communicate to the client to help them understand why we're doing these things. And it almost all of us always leads to a bigger bench. That's what we really want to get to, right?
Just wear smaller shirts. That's all you do.
Yeah, just wear smaller shirts. Absolutely. And Marty, you brought up a good point. Having fun with it and understanding the principles and just mapping your tools into what those principles are. I mean, my training space looks like probably a medieval training facility or a Roman ludus, but you can still get corrective exercise principles to work there. So now let's dive into assessments dictating the programming and how we're going to use that information to inform this 4-step corrective process.
Well, I mean, as you guys know, this is something that's not new. We put this pretty much on every CES webinar we've done since the beginning of time, because I mean, we are still following a process based upon, again, the assessments. Because again, even though somebody comes in and they have a weight loss goal, the assessment's going to be key. And in order for them to actually lose more weight, if they move better, they're going to be more efficient. So therefore, they're going to burn more calories. And so, you know, you want to think that obviously the SMART goals are super important. You want them to be obviously specific, and then you want to get all the information that you need. But based on the assessments, again, this is something that we've said multiple times. You're going to inhibit the muscles that are overactive, that are causing the compensations. You're going to lengthen by static stretching the muscles that are causing those compensations. And then you're going to activate the muscles that are allowing those compensations. And then you're going to do an integration, which is just a total body exercise to kind of get the upper and lower body used to the newfound movement that you just got, and new activation of those muscles. And so again, when we show you some of these, we're going to show you some common exercises that you're used to seeing in the textbook with specific targeted muscles based on whatever we saw in the assessment. But then we're also going to kind of spice it up. Like, hey, if you don't want to use a piece of tubing to do, you know, this, that, and the other, then try doing something different. And I think we've got some creative things for you guys to possibly add into your toolbox.
Okay, so thank you for that, Wendy. Now we're going to question 2 to get some of you fine people into our CES pilot workshop. And Wendy talked about assessments, and Wendy and Marty have talked about this for quite a long time. If you notice on your overhead squat assessment, the feet turning out, what muscle group, or you can name any of the muscle groups, but which muscle group would you inhibit? I am accepting all correct answers. If you notice,
yeah,
no,
pick me.
You're going to be there. You're going to be you're going to be presenting the workshop, so you are and your family members too are disqualified from this question. But which muscle would you inhibit? Go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we will see who won the spot in the CES virtual workshop. And while we're waiting for those answers to come in, let's talk about the first 2 steps of the corrective process: inhibit and lengthen. What are some of the tools that we're going to use with our presentation today?
Well, as we've, as we talked about, when we talk about inhibit and lengthening, very often, and especially even in the textbook, we talk about self-myofascial technique. And again, we usually use a foam roller. And I think foam rollers are fantastic. I am obviously a very huge fan. But, keep in mind, you've got lacrosse balls, you've got, different balls that vibrate. You've got the, different foam rollers now that vibrate. There's some with knobs, so the rumble rollers. You've got a bunch of different things to consider. But another one that, is becoming more and more popular, and you're seeing more and more people have, is the percussion therapy type tool. So in this picture, you're going to see the Hypervolt. And again, when you're thinking about inhibiting, again, if you don't have a foam roller or you want to use this, the percussion therapy is awesome because it's going to help relieve the muscle soreness and stiffness. It's obviously going to help improve your range of motion. It promotes circulation, and it accelerates the warm up and recovery. So instead of sitting and marinating, 20 to 30 seconds, you're still looking and kind of going through the area that you're targeting. You're still going to try to hold on that area and marinate for 20 to 30 seconds or until that pain is reduced. So you still want to spend time on it. Oftentimes I see people just go back and forth, but you still want to take some time to try to really pinpoint those very tender areas. And again, there's a lot of different tools like that. We're showing the Hypervolt, but again, you've got the Theragun, and there's other pieces of equipment by different companies out there that still do the same thing. But I think percussion therapy is fantastic. And some people, obviously, they own their own and they can do it at home, or you can do it with them. The big thing, again, you just really want to watch the bony processes. Like, you don't want to roll over someone's vertebrae or like their elbow or their kneecap. So you still want to be very cautious and very knowledgeable in what areas you're actually foam rolling. Using the device on. But again, you really want to focus on the areas that showed to be overactive based on the assessment. And then another one, obviously, when we're talking about lengthening, we utilize static stretching. And those of you guys that attended the stick mobility session in Optima, those guys are fantastic. They're based out of California. We actually own these as well, but they're made out of synthetic plastic, so they bend. And some of the different positionings you can get in while you're actually doing some of these stretches, utilizing the different stick sizes, I think are fantastic. And they're a very good tool, again, that's going to combine the joint mobilization. You can do strength training with them. And then again, it gets deep fascial stretching, which will increase the athletic performance. And at the end of the day, all we're trying to do at this point, again, is to increase the range of motion in muscles that have shown to be overactive. And again, these are just two other tools that I'm sure you guys have seen out on the market, but I think they're fantastic.
Okay, thanks for all of that, Wendy. Now, question two for you lucky winners. If your client shows up or you do your overhead squat assessment and you see that your client has a low back arch, what is the best hamstring stretch that you can do for your client with a low back arch? Why are you laughing, Wendy?
Because I can't wait to see this answer. And if I see something pop up that's not right, I'm going to tell you, you might want to go back and listen to one of our webinars.
And just so if you haven't learned my personality now, I'm a little bit of a trickster. So keep that in mind when you're answering the question. Okay, so now let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the activation exercises that we can do. Marty, why don't you take us through that, please?
Certainly. So here's some of the actual images right out of our text. So these are, the motions that we need you to apply resistance against, so that way you can then strengthen those muscles to offset the weak muscles, to strengthen those weak muscles, to offset the overactive muscles, to get back to more ideal and normal positioning. So if we start at the top left right here, what you're seeing is the posterior tib. So he's going into plantar flexion and inversion. That's a traditional way to do it against resistance. So the resistance comes in the opposite direction. So we pull him into dorsiflexion and eversion, and he goes into plantar flexion, inversion. Then you'll see right here, he's doing his anterior tib, which is dorsiflexion with slight inversion. Then here we've got a glute medius exercise where he's going into abduction. You can go into a little bit of extension and external rotation. Here, this could be just a pure row to get mid-trap, or this could be part of that shoulder combo too, where you go into external rotation and then into a press down into retraction. And then clearly you see here an exercise everyone's very familiar with is a ball cobra for that retraction and depression. All of these are absolute excellent exercises. These are fabulous to have in your toolbox. This might be the right progression or regression for somebody, but we just want to go into some other depth and say it does not have to be this structured. It just depends on your client's ability and where they are with controlling these motions. And then when we show you the new tools, as long as they can emulate proper ideal and form and technique with their 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, it gives you an opportunity to get a little more creative and not always stick just with what we show here in the basics in the book.
Okay. All right. So going back to a couple of these exercises, what are some other options? These are the most common, but what are some other things that you like to do, especially for the posterior tib, anterior tib?
Mm-hmm. When do you want to go first, or?
No, you can go.
Okay. So I'm going to start with the anterior tib because I was doing this in the gym today. So again, I will do them isolated like you'll see here, sitting and do the dorsiflexion inversion. But what I do is I do like what I call the penguin walks. So I get my ideal posture, 5 connect chain checkpoints, and then I bring up my toes. I don't really rock back on my heels because I still want my core engaged. And I do my heel walks, so I'm elevating my front part of my foot, or I'm in dorsiflexion with inversion. And I pick 25 or 30 yards in the fitness center that I'm in or wherever I want to be. And I just walk very slow because I want some time under tension. So it's an isometric, but at least in my gym, they don't have the bands and I wouldn't have the ability to do this. So if I didn't do it at home, if I go to the gym, I'd have to come up with something creative. So that's one way that I'll do it. Now, another way that I'll do posterior tib is when I look at going into plantar flexion inversion, I can combine that slightly when I do a seated hamstring curl. So if I'm in a seated hamstring curl machine with my feet out in front of me, some people think I'm doing it completely wrong because everybody else will have their feet turned out. I will actually plantar flex and go into inversion. So that way, when I go into my hamstring curl, at least I'm activating some of that posterior tibialis as well. I mean, there's medial hamstring and other things going on, but I am also combining that posterior tib to some level to get that in there. So again, that what we'll call that accidental exercise. Now, if I need to target someone specifically because there's a big deficit, sometimes sticking to the most basic version of them is the best way to do it. But I like to have some other varieties of it because sometimes I'm in a hurry. Sometimes the person doesn't need as much, or why not put it in? Because we know that these are the muscles that tend to become underactive if we don't ever address them. So that's kind of anterior, posterior tib, kind of the ways that I would hit it. Wendy, I don't know if you have anything else to kind of throw into that.
No, I mean, that's how I would do the posterior. I think on the anterior side too, another one that I do is I actually have them do a semi squat against the wall with their back against the wall. And then at that point, they just do, instead of walking hill walks, I actually just have them do toe raises on their own. So they just bring their toes up and then slowly lower them back down. So that's something that they're using their body weight, but they still have to go through, the acute variables on the tempo and really get some time under tension, but they're applying kind of more of their body weight. But yeah, and again, as we go through, you're going to see some of the different, some of the other things that you can do utilizing some of the different pieces of equipment.
Mm-hmm. And guys, remember, if we, again, going back to the accidental, and when I say accidental, we're not targeting one muscle like you see here in these images. That's my terminology. I'm not saying that's NASM's. But if I do a single leg balance exercise and I keep all my kinetic chain checkpoints in order and I have a nice arch in my foot, the posterior tib has to be working.
Right.
It's working in isometrically, but again, there's still going to be carryover, to other parts of when you would need your posterior tib to fire. So again, there's, the way we show it here, when someone has what I'm going to say more of a significant deficit, but that's why Wendy and myself and friends always talk about getting the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, because then obviously you're going to start getting some of those other muscles firing as well. So that's why it's so important.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for that. Now, I skipped the bottom 2 exercises because I think we're going to talk about this in relation to suspension training. And since suspension training is so popular, can you talk us through, Wendy and Marty, some activation exercises we can do for the upper extremity? So let's take a look at suspension training, either TRX or gymnastics rings. Yeah.
There you go. I mean, yeah. So on this one, I mean, I think this lady's doing a fantastic job. I mean, you'll see that she's in a very good plank. I think, when you look at it, it could just be a plank. So you could be doing a, phase 1 core specific exercise where you're drawing in, squeezing your glutes and trying to maintain, proper alignment. Again, she's not on the ground, so you're not having to deal with gravity. So, because you're on an incline, you would think it would be easier. However, again, now you're with your hands and straps that are not, that you're going to have to try to keep level. That's one way of looking at this. But, on an activation side, if you see someone and they're in a push-up position, or you notice that they are what we call wingers, meaning their scapula come up, so scapula winging, then usually that's an indication that the serratus anterior is underactive. And so if you get in this position, you can actually have them press through their shoulder blades to start going into protraction rather than just doing a punch protraction with like a chest press to plus or a push up with a plus. This is just another variation to really try to focus solely on the serratus, but obviously getting core involved as well.
Yeah. And when we show these images, remember, we're just kind of plucking these off the internet. These are not our clients. So if you see some slight deviations, we see those too. So it's just, we're trying to get the best images to show you the modality. So just always assume that if we're all there, all the kinetic chain checkpoints would be in order. So, because of course, I'm staring at the gentleman's head on the right. I know
right.
So let's just get that out of the way, that yes, these are not our clients and our images. But again, it's as Wendy's saying, this is just gives some new variety. And again, what is basic for one person for corrective might be, advanced for somebody else. It's just where on the spectrum, and then getting creative. And again, we know that almost everybody could get weakness in their serratus. So even if they don't have that as a major compensation, why would you not want to throw some stuff in there to prevent it down the line? So this is where getting, having a different look at corrective can really help you with your programming.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, with the gentleman that's looking down, obviously we would make him go into retraction and keep ideal alignment in the spine. It's basically he's doing a cobra. And so as you saw on the ball, on the other one, that's very commonly seen. But, again, you could use cables, you can use suspension training, you can do anything. We're really trying to focus on the mid to low trap that we know is usually very underactive, especially if someone has rounded shoulders or if their arms, tend to fall forward as well. So just another way of looking at it. Again, these aren't things that should be completely mind blown, but we wanted to bring it to your attention because you can use anything, again, as long as it makes sense. And again, we're still specifically working on areas that really need to be, that have been found to be underactive in the assessment.
Yeah, and where this came to life for me, truly, when I started to think about this prior to the Optima that I did it, was I'd have a couple clients, and God forbid if you gave them the same exercise 2 workouts in a row, and they're like, we did that exercise last time, and depending again, on my person, I'm like, well, you still stink at it, right? You're joking around, of course. Don't use that, right? But my point is that they want something new every day. And I'm like, yeah, but you haven't accomplished the task of learning that movement pattern or that. So I'm like, all right, I'm not going to over explain this to them that they need to keep doing this. I'm just going to give them the same exercise 10 different ways. And now they think it's new every time. And that's where some of this, I was doing it, but that's where I really realized, okay, I'm going to create my exercise programs based on what they need, but I'm going to change it up every time so they think it's something new. And I had 27 different versions of Cobras, and then I never heard the complaint again that, oh, I did that last time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sure you did.
Yes, that's unfortunately that's the dilemma of a lifer in physical culture. Skill acquisition can be boring. You have to you have to do it thousands of times so that you get it right. And anytime there's a change to your body, you gain a little weight, you lose a little, something changes in your life, you have to learn that skill again. So I'm experiencing that now with a daughter that's growing, and she's having to relearn all of her dance movements every time she gets an inch, changes a lever. So skill acquisition and training is a long road.
Yes.
So now that brings me actually to our next question. And we've talked about this before. Yeah, we talked about this before. But Marty, you brought up a good point of, this exercise is boring. Why do we do it? So what I want to ask the people out there is, how do you use corrective exercise? Is corrective exercise a standalone workout that you do for 6 weeks and then you leave it alone? Or can you use it as a warm-up to your regular resistance training? Which way is the proper way to use a corrective exercise program? Go ahead and type your answer in the chat box. And Marty is going to talk to me about kettlebells.
We always put this in here for you, Prentice.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
Like I said, I do want the video of you changing a light bulb with a kettlebell, because I know you'll figure that out. But kettlebells are great. And I think primarily people at first thought they were a power-based modality, which they absolutely can be. And then maybe they saw them as a strength, but they absolutely can be fabulous for stabilization training. So just a couple versions here, as you've got starting from the left here as we look at the slide, is he's doing a farmer's carry. So again, if he's in shoulder retraction and depression, chin tucked, and he's got the right gait pattern, abs, drawn in with a neutral spine, think of all that activation he's getting. Why to him, he's like, oh, I'm doing farmer's carry. we've all seen how bad people do farmers carries, right? They're so worried about how much weight they move. They're just trucking along and they're forming techniques all over the place. It's not a strongman competition, right? Now in strongman competition, you got to pick a weight, you got to get it there. This is just getting people biomechanically firing up by using something that seems a little more advanced by doing a carry. I love the one arm carries because we don't want to tilt. We want to chuck the chin. And now you're really getting that side of the body to really have to fire all those muscles while you're doing your walking pattern. So just to them, it seems like a very easy exercise, but to us, when we cue it right, we get a lot of bang for our buck there. And then again, this is one of those ones that can elevate the heart rate as well. So if they're looking for that, I want to breathe a little bit, we accomplish that simultaneously. Oop, I don't hear you, Prentice. Oop.
Did
We lost you, Prentice, audio. Okay, we'll keep going. I'm thinking he said, Marty, that was a wonderful explanation. Thank you for the amazing description. Move on. That's what I could read his lips. So Wendy, we'll go into the next exercise.
Yeah.
So not the next slide, just the next exercise. So the next exercise was the bottom up press. So if you guys have never done this one, again, get yourself in 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, feet hip width apart, neutral spine, everything dialed in like you know how to do, and do a couple with a light kettlebell, and then go immediately grab a dumbbell the same weight and see how easy it is. It's the same exact weight, but you have a balanced implement versus an unbalanced implement. So all that co-contraction that has to happen through the forearm, into the shoulder, into the core, into also the cervical spine to make sure you don't shoot your head forward is a fabulous way to get a lot of the sound biomechanics that we need. And again, when you're doing one arm, obviously that can translate, depending how heavy it is obviously it's got to be appropriate, all the way down into your core and your pelvis as well. So just a fabulous exercise that I really like to use. So Wendy, do you have anything on those first two before we get into the third?
No, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I love the farmer carries. I think, again, when they're done right, as you said, and I'm sure, again, as Prentice would totally agree, they are absolutely fantastic. And I don't think, that you could also do a one-arm farmer carry as well. Again, just depending on how you want to, what you're trying to target and the ultimate goal. And then, like you said, with the presses, I think, oftentimes, even though, technically when you look at it, it's like a standing kind of like push press, with the arm motion that, I mean, people are so used to always grabbing dumbbells, but you put that kettlebell upside down and you do a press, it really does change the dynamic of the actual, exercise itself. So it's very, very challenging, but still one that I use very often and really do like.
And then the third picture is just really a combination of the two. So you've got that isometric at 90-90. I think some people call it the waiter's carry, but now you're taking a, locomotion, you're walking while you're doing an isometric hold of that upside down kettlebell. So again, you'll see people start walking really quickly. I'd rather it be a lighter kettlebell, ideal form, and a slow paced walk, more time under tension to get all that co-activation, muscular contraction in that whole shoulder girdle, core, hips, etc.
Absolutely. And I love this one too, because I mean, even if you didn't want to do it as a walk, I mean, trying to have someone keep that, keep that weight in that same position, the isometric position. I mean, think about what it's doing at the shoulder, the entire, the shoulder complex. So all those muscles really do have to, stabilize in order to maintain the alignment of that 90-degree angle. And then obviously you're working on grip strength as well, which is super important for people, especially if you want to advance them to more exercises where that's a factor. But then even just doing something like a static lunge to balance while you're holding that, super, super challenging. Again, there's so many creative ways that you could use just that positioning alone. But like you said, you can walk, you can lunge, you can side lunge, you can do a lot of different things. But again, think about how total body these exercises really are by just using a kettlebell. And again, just being creative.
Absolutely. Well, looks like we still lost Prentice. So Wendy, reading lips, he said, amazing job, Wendy.
I know.
Thank you as always for your excellent advice. So we will move now to the next slide.
Yeah. And this is, Marty, I know this is going to be kind of your slide. This is your baby coming up. So when we talk about, activation, again, people are like, well, when they think of treadmill, they automatically think just cardiovascular and that's it. So why don't you kind of go into a little more detail specifically of how this can be activation?
Sure. So shameless plug. My full-time job is director of education training for Techno Gym. And, we're partnered up with NASM because we, great companies think alike. And it's a non-motorized treadmill. So if you have somebody that shuffles, I worked in the private club segment, country club segment, so I could have clients from 13 to 85. So we all have worked with some of those clients that their gait gets shorter, they shuffle. Put them on a motorized treadmill, they're moving. It's great. But all they have to do is continue to shuffle, pick their foot up just enough, and the belt moves underneath them. On a non-motorized, when we're looking at our skill mill here, is you have to be the motor and the brakes. So you have to lengthen out your gait, like you'll see this, the lady on the left, and you have to get the right ground contact time and the right gait cycle to propel yourself. So now all of a sudden you're getting more anterior tib work because you have to dorsiflex to get your foot out in front of you. You get more core activation, you get more glute, you get triple extension because you have to push off like you would if you're outside. So you get all these other things. We've done the EMG studies on glute activation, core activation, posture. You can't lean forward on it or you would feel yourself falling forward. You would automatically stand up and correct yourself. So there's so many cool things that come from it. And then there's the whole cognitive, which, the brain activation too. So it's just, you get a lot of ththings going on the non-motorized skill mill than you would if you were doing a motorized treadmill. Then we also have the ability here to throw on some magnetic resistance and now get in, I like the full extended position. There's other ways you can do the sled push. But now think about as he drives into that to propel himself and do the sled push, look how great his core is lined up. He's like in a standing plank. So again, this is how we coach it. Chin tuck, draw in, drive through the machine, get those shoulder blades in the right position. Now he's pushing the sled, but it's a full body integration or activation technique. You can even look at it as an integration as well, depending on the person's ability. So two great ways to throw in, the walking and the sled push to, again, elicit a tremendous response in the muscles that are generally going to be underactive in most people.
Absolutely. I love our skill mill. We use it all the time. Athletes love it. And it really does. I mean, depending on the amount of weight, what they're pushing. And again, if they're keeping proper form, all the muscles that have to activate in order to execute it correctly. I mean, it's fantastic.
I agree.
Did we get you back, Prentice? Nope.
Okay.
Oh, yes. There you are.
All right. So now, since we finished that and I've been listening, unable to say anything, let's talk about battle ropes. This is a fun tool. So how are we going to use this for activation that's different than all of the other videos we see for public consumption?
Mm-hmm. So for me, it's really the patterning, right? It's how am I moving the ropes? So most people have poor posture. So whenever I did the battle ropes for most of my clients, we had to get them to the point where the ropes were appropriate. So I always recommend having different thicknesses and weights of the rope. So let's assume that you have the appropriate rope. I like to do external rotation. So if I'm going to do something cardiovascular with my upper body, again, chin has to be in the right position. Their feet have to be in the right position. Their core is in the right position. But instead of going internal, because I don't want to drive them here, I'm going to do external rotation. So it's just, again, finding a way to use this amazing tool and then match it with the proper biomechanics for what I'm trying to accomplish with that client.
Absolutely. I do the same thing. I use external rotation. I also do the snake pattern a lot as well to try to get a little more obliques as well as, trying to work, because again, you want to think as you go out to, you want to drive them big. A lot of times people just keep everything really small. You want to make the patterns extremely wide and everything too. So therefore, I mean, think about what's happening, at the posterior chain, too, like in the shoulder, when you're thinking about posterior delt and everything like that, that's also shown to be very underactive in people with rounded shoulders. So I think it's fantastic. Again, there's so many different variations and you're limited by the ropes of just your creativity. Because again, time under tension, how long are you having them do it? How long are they performing it? What patterns are they doing? And again, just look at your assessment results, see the muscles that are underactive, and then think on a creative side, what could they do that's different? Because again, people enjoy the battle ropes. They feel like, it's something totally different, and again, you are getting the cardio side of it as well. So especially if it's a weight loss client or power production client, because you need them obviously to get to power, but they're not there yet, you can kind of incorporate a 2-for-1 here.
Yep. And then the gentleman on the right, again, we're taking a still picture. There's a lot of different form and variation that we could correct here, but doing something on a single leg is still, think about getting that posterior tib, that glute medius, the glute, the core. Maybe he was doing almost like a single leg Romanian with it. Again, there's different ways that we could assume what was going on in this picture. Again, if it's, if we're just going in ideal posture, maybe I'd go a little lighter rope and have them just stand more upright. But again, the concept is here that we can take a single leg exercise, do our rope patterning, and still get some corrective exercise in there while we're having fun, while we're eliciting a greater response cardiovascularly, and giving that client something that's a little more, quote unquote, engaging to them than maybe just banding exercises.
Absolutely. And single leg, single arm. So again, contralateral movements, you can have them walk forward and back. And then as they walk forward, they're still using their arms, but as they walk forward, they have to walk and hold. And so balance, can they balance, maintain proper alignment, go into maybe a single leg squat, go backwards? I mean, again, it's your creativity that you're limited to, but I use the ropes all the time and I absolutely love them.
Mm-hmm. All right, awesome. So this question is this question's for both of you. It comes from me. No curveballs, Wendy. But
no free workshop either. What? No
workshop questions. The last time I did it, I blew up the audio, so I'm not going to ask workshop questions for another couple minutes. But when we talk about activation in the traditional corrective exercise sense, there's a tempo associated with it. Now, to move the battle ropes, it has to make them move and to have fun. You have to move them at a little bit faster tempo than what's recommended for activation. Can you talk about the differences in tempo and if that makes a difference or not for the client?
I mean, yeah, for me personally, I mean, obviously, if we are activating a specific muscle, we're targeting a specific muscle, then we would definitely stay with the 4-2-1 tempo. Mm-hmm. But again, this wouldn't be something that I do with a client on day one. This is something that, within the, 4 to 6 week time period, hopefully we are seeing some progressions. We know that there's still a little bit of weakness, that they're not, fully ready to move on to, a phase 2 quite at this moment, possibly, or whatever phase of training they're in. So again, it's just another way to still work the muscle. I mean, yes, it's going to be at a little faster tempo. Yes, there's going to be some differences. And again, the tempo is extremely, extremely important to actually get kind of the benefits of whatever it is that you're trying to focus on during that particular exercise. But sometimes, again, that was the last point of the 3 rules. Have fun. Don't always be such a stickler where you're like, I always have to have a 4-2-1 tempo. Like if you did this one day, again, we're not using it like a power workout. I'm not taking them from a CES and putting them in a phase 5. What I'm doing is I'm still focusing on form. I'm still focusing on movement. We're trying to activate certain muscles. So again, I'm sticking within the right muscle activation area that I'm trying to, quote, target. However, I'm just doing it in a little bit different way, using a little different modality. So therefore, it's not just so stale all the time, because I want my clients to keep coming back. I want to see them progress and get to their goals.
And then to add to that, what I might do is the rope may not be the activation for their upper body, because maybe, but it might be something, hey, I need to get more anterior, posterior tib and glute medius in isometrically, but they're not going to sit there and do single leg balance exercises. They want to sweat. So this is where I give them what they want, while I give them what they need. So they're okay. They have no issues with their upper body. I'm working more on their lower body. And I'm like, all right, they want to sweat, but I need to get more activation of the posterior tib glute med than what we did. So that's where I'll kind of trick them into it and be like, all right, we're doing battling rope. And then understand that I'm really using the battling rope to get after that single leg.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks for that. Thanks for that explanation, because I could hear that question was going to be asked. I've started to understand our friends, talking to them here and on social media. So now let's talk about some creative integration exercises that we can use. So let's take a look. Talk us through the most common ones.
Well, here we go. I mean, I know it is probably no surprise that Marty and I have the squat to row, single leg squat to row.
I feel like I've seen it.
I'm sure you have. You notice this time we actually put a single leg in there because we've always put the double. But the thing is you know what, it's a fantastic exercise. And again, you see this commonly in the book. We are now combining, quads. We're combining the prime movers, the quads, the glutes, as well as, the mid to lower back. So the rhomboids and those areas when you're doing the row. It is awesome. And still seriously one of my favorite exercises, whether two legs or single leg. And again, the step up to overhead press, you can never really go wrong with that when you're trying to do a really good integration exercise. So again, remember what the focus is. We're trying to now combine upper and lower movements and have the body in kinetic chain working simultaneously the way that it was meant to with neuromuscular efficiency, which is again, the right muscles firing at the right time and the right plane of motion. So what other exercises could you do using some of these different modalities that can actually have the same outcome as what you're seeing traditionally in the textbook, as well as traditionally in many of our webinars? And we're going to show you a few that we like to use and give you the reasons why.
And we're back to our old friend, the suspension trainer. So yeah, let's take a look at the suspension trainer image and tell us some of the things that you like to do for integration with the suspension trainer. Both of you, go for it.
I'll jump in here. So here on the right, there's your squat to row, right? So you can use it with the cables. You can do it all kinds of different ways. So once again, maybe somebody's in their home and they don't have a cable column, like, COVID hit, right? Or maybe you train and you bring your equipment with you. So you can still do a squat to row. On the left, this could be a couple different exercises, right? It could be a single leg Romanian deadlift into, like, maybe he's reaching out into a plank. A lot of different things you can do with suspension training. Again, I always say, go through those companies' education, just run the filter of your NASM certification through that. Because, when you go to a modality education, they may not follow the same scientific principles that you learned here with NASM. Still go take so that you can learn how to use that tool more. But figure out where in the NASM toolbox does it fit, and then just adapt it in, and then watch the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints.
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding. Wendy, do you have anything what are your favorite suspension trainer exercises for integration?
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the, I call it the inverted row. I like the single leg squat to rows. I mean, there's so many different things. I really can't choose one because I think, again, it's just a variation. And at this point with the suspension trainer, of course, I'm still definitely following the tempo of these because again, it makes it harder because now you're having to hold yourself in air and maintain proper alignment and move correctly. So again, when somebody has like overactive calves, I think doing the squat to row this way instead of using maybe even like a ball squat, sometimes people find this to be a little easier. Same reason with the squat to row that Marty and I like with the cables. It's just a different way of performing the same movement patterns. And because they're holding something different, there is a different demand placed on it. I think people really enjoy the variation as well as to what we are getting the same outcome, which is contracting mainly the prime movers of the glute and back. And quads.
And also with the suspension trainer, like maybe I'm just speaking for the guys, but if you want to blow up bis and tris, right, do the bicep triceps, and they think they're doing the gun shows, Wendy would say, but it's core activation the entire time, right? Glute activation, getting the whole spine in the right position while they do elbow flexion and tricep extension. And you can, even with the tricep, you can push it out into a plank afterwards, but they're focused on crushing their triceps, but look at all the other stuff you give them, instead of letting them just go do a simple tricep push down.
Yeah, that's the true sense of integration. We have to use that, what we would call in the book, actually that can be a question. So if we do activation exercises in the corrective exercise, in the 4-step corrective process, and activation is intramuscular coordination, we're working within that one muscle group. What would an integration exercise be? What would be the official term for what's happening? What type of coordination is happening with the muscles in an integration exercise? Go ahead and type that answer into the chat box, and you will be able to see Wendy and Marty again on the CES virtual workshop.
And while those questions are coming in, I'm gonna let Marty take this because I know I don't want to get hammered by, I took your kettlebell class and I'm still nervous to talk to you about kettlebells.
All right, so I'll jump in here. So people like to, look at the close to the goblet squat. He's not in perfect form, but it's similar to that where you're holding the weight out in front of you. Now, the beauty biomechanically is, maybe people don't even understand it, is when you have the weight out in front of you, it forces core activation and it allows you to sit back a little bit and maybe have better form and technique, because think of it like a teeter-totter. So some people just think it's a cool looking exercise, but they don't understand the true biomechanics between doing a front squat and compared to doing a back squat. So you can see his form and technique is pretty good here. His feet might be turned out a little bit. I'd like to see his chin tucked just slightly, but again, this was a pretty clean image. But holding the weight out in front, again, forces that core to fire, allows the glutes to fire better, which means we're going to get better patterning. And that's, at the end of the day, we want a better squat. And then the kettlebell swing is nothing more than a dynamic plank. If I can't do a plank, I shouldn't be swinging a kettlebell. So the whole time here that we're focused on is, can they now take that into a dynamic plank? So you're getting great hip extension. You're getting great core stability. And then to do the plank properly, when you stop, you're not letting the arms fly forward. You're getting those shoulders in a nice, more of a retracted position, the chin tucked. You're not letting that kettlebell bring all of your head and shoulder blades forward. So think about, if you're keeping yourself in that shoulder retracted, depressed position, chin tucked, while you're swinging that kettlebell, think of all those muscles that have to hold you in position while you accelerate and then decelerate that kettlebell. So just some great, phenomenal exercises that, can be a little more challenging than some of the other ones we showed. But again, these are awesome exercises to get people to move better.
This is all very good. I have very little to add. The only thing that I would suggest is, don't be afraid to use the get up in your training. You can program that in there. And I think sometimes people are a little intimidated by the prospect of having to stand all the way up with the kettlebell. But I read the Kettlebell Bible, and you don't have to do that. You can actually break that movement down into some of its component pieces and use that as a corrective itself. Take some of those component pieces and you overlap. Like you were saying earlier, Marty, you understand your client's assessment, what they need to work on, and you can use that particular piece of the get up to as an integration exercise, and it works really well. And then in addition to the swing, of course, I'd add a single arm swing in there when your clients can tolerate it. It's good exercise in anti-rotation, because that kettlebell wants to punish you and rotate your torso. But it does. I do it all the time. I agree.
I'm laughing because I remember the first time I tried it, I was like, how hard can this be? It was a lot more challenging than I anticipated. So yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, and this goes for all of the modalities you've chosen today, it's easy to do. You can go up and take battle ropes and do external rotations. Anyone can do it. But when you pay attention to all of the details, your kinetic chain checkpoints, and setting up your body for that accidental exercise that you talk about, and that makes the exercise a lot more difficult when you have to focus on all of that detail.
Absolutely.
And speaking of battle ropes, let's talk about battle ropes and integration. What do we have there?
Well, again, Marty and I kind of discussed this a little bit when we talked about the battle ropes before. But this individual, it looks like she's doing lunges, staying in a lunge position, and then actually moving the lunge. She can lunge forward and then come out of it, or like I said with my clients, often I'll have them kind of come forward a few steps, lunge, then walk back, and then go into a reverse lunge, There's a lot of different ways, again, that you could do that while you have the rope going in different directions. And so whether you're having them do, with the arms going at the same time, they're doing, individual motions, or, as we even said, single arm. Again, there's kind of a progression. You got to think about that with the battle ropes as well. And then as you can see, this other individual, she's going into a frontal plane lunge, which again, you want to think about all three planes of motion. You can still do that with the battle ropes. It's still very, very important to train in all three planes of motion. I know somebody had asked a question about the inertia workouts, and if you guys have tried that, it is extremely challenging as well. But again, it is another modality that's going to challenge your core, still get, the momentum going, where your body has to make sure that it can control whatever it is that you're having that client do. So I think all of these different modalities that have been mentioned in the comments, as well as the stuff that we've covered, it's all fantastic to incorporate as long as your client can do it and there's a purpose behind why you're having them do it.
Okay. Yeah. You definitely want to make sure that everything has a purpose. You're giving clients things that they can control. I think that's another thing that needs to be said about modalities. It all looks cool at face value, and you can definitely gut through a lot of the movements, but it has to be appropriate for what that assessment is telling you, what Wendy led with in the webinar, and client has to be able to own it so that it can have a place in their training program. So Marty, I'll let you finish. You're going to finish and talk to us about the skill mill. I have a funny story, not appropriate for this webinar, but just using the skill mill. And I have to say, it hurt my ego. And I wasn't even trying to use the toughest setting. So talk to us about the skill mill and integration exercise.
If this makes you feel any better, apprentice, the skill mill is undefeated. And we've got it with, NFL teams, major universities. Yeah. So it was designed for Olympic athletes. So let's be honest, it's with 10 levels of magnetic resistance, it will eventually break you down in a good way. But again, going back to depending on the person's ability and the resistance you use, when you really get into a really high level sled push, and again, it doesn't mean you're sprinting, but meaning that you have great form and technique with the right amount of resistance so you can stay in good form and technique, it's not going to take long. 10, 15, 20 yards, you are going to start to feel your body heat up in a good way. And that you're getting all those muscles working. And when you get all those muscles working, higher cardiovascular demand, higher energy output. And then when we turn around and do a retro walk and a drag, that's a game changer, because not a lot of people are used to going backwards with pulling resistance. So talk about getting those hamstrings fired up, getting all those shoulders back, depressed, and pull while you're walking backwards against resistance is phenomenal for integration.
Definitely a lot harder than it looks, I'll tell you that. So
Yep.
All right. So then I think we're ready maybe for some questions.
Yes.
Or recaps, I guess. That would be the basic one. But I'll go ahead and tell you my key takeaways. Prentice looks like he's focusing so much on something. So when we talk about that, again, what we said from the very, very beginning, assessments truly are key. And, we gave you guys some options. Again, some of it you may have to speed up, some of it you may slow down. But if you are really, truly going to use the corrective exercise model, think about the acute variables, specifically what you're trying to focus, and then make sure that your exercise selection makes sense. Again, you're always going to follow the model. Make sure that you inhibit and lengthen the areas that are overactive. I mean, again, if you think about that, if they're overactive, they're still weak. If they're in a lengthened position, they're weak. So you want to try to get proper length tension relationship back into the joint. So therefore, it's going to actually fire appropriately to get the best outcome for your client, while also reducing the chances of injury. Again, don't forget all three phases of training. That's going to be or all planes of motion while you're training, because we move in three planes. We want to train in three planes. And as always, you always want to maintain the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. Make sure that your clients can handle the modalities. Just because you have them in your gym doesn't mean that it's appropriate for that client. And don't say, well, we got this new thing, let's try it out and have fun. Make sure that you've tried it out first. You understand the demand that particular modality must have in order to do it correctly. So therefore, when you do implement it in your client's program, you know what they're going to be feeling, you understand it, and then you know common compensations to look for because you've gone through it yourself.
Yep, absolutely. I think you covered every single thing, Wendy. Those are the key takeaways. Great job.
Thanks, man.
All right. It seems like I'm back. It seems like I am the victim of a poor internet connection today. So I apologize for that. But while we are continuing to sign off, does anyone, all of you who've joined us today, do you have any questions for Wendy and for Marty? I think this was asked previously before I jumped off about inertia workouts, and I think you answered that.
Yeah, I did. Again,
yeah.
they're great. I mean, again, just make sure your client can maintain it, and again, how much resistance, how much movement, and make sure that their core really is engaged. So therefore, they're going to get the major benefit from that movement. So.
Yeah, and I think the point of that is that if you listen to everything that Wendy and Marty said today, all of that, you can run down the list of all of the modalities that are available, even the shake weight. You have to figure out, you have to use your client's assessments. You have to understand what they need. You have to understand the proper integration exercise. Then what Marty said, you have to understand how to use the modality, and then look at it through the lens of your NASM training, and that'll answer for you whether or not it's a good modality. But Mark has a question here, and thanks for joining us, Mark. Mark wants to know if there are any suggestions to activate the mid and lower traps stuck at home with minimal equipment.
Yeah, this one's actually one of the easier ones to do home. You got all your Cobra variations. And again, there's different ways you can apply resistance if they need it. You can do single leg, change your body position. Then also, from home, the suspension trainers are a relatively easy tool to implement, and then bands. So there's a lot of different ways. The key thing is just get them into that shoulder depression and retraction and external rotation, and then figure out how you can change it up to give them different variety while you're doing that.
All right. Thanks, Marty. Are there any other questions?
I think Karen has a question.
Karen. Let's see. Okay. Thank you for your question, and thank you for joining us today, Karen. And she says, last week you talked about not foam rolling the erector spinae. I know this was last week's content, but since this week you referred to the percussion gun, would you use that? I missed the why behind not rolling the lumbar erector spinae. Thanks.
So I'll take this one. So I think I was the one that said it. So you want to be cautious when you're doing your cervical spine and your lumbar spine. And the reason being is because those are more stable joints than mobile joints, because the thoracic spine is really where you want to be mobile. However, the erector spinae is very overactive in multiple individuals. So it is important to inhibit that muscle. What I was referring to in the lumbar spine is you don't necessarily want to place the foam roller behind the neck or in the lumbar spine, mainly because of the processes of the bony areas and the exposure with not a lot of muscle or skin to cover that, where it can cause some compression and discomfort to an individual by placing their body weight on their actual spine. And also too, if they have an anterior tilt and you shove a foam roller underneath it, sometimes you're actually causing that compensation at a great, putting them into a greater arch. So I'm not saying it's not good to, quote, foam roll the spine. What I said is an alternative you could do is take a tennis ball, put it inside of a sock, or two tennis balls, put them inside of the sock. So therefore, the area that doesn't have the ball, it could be your spine, and you could roll easily up and down that area to try to get a little bit more of the inhibition component. except for the tennis ball sometimes can be too much for people, because remember, the smaller the implement, the deeper it goes. When you talk about the percussion guns or any type of percussion therapy, I absolutely use the gun on all of my clients. I own one. I love it. I use it on pretty much everywhere. The big thing is just make sure you don't hit the spine. So I usually put my fingers that run through the spine, and I run the gun along the erectors. So therefore I make sure that I'm not going to hit anything other than my hand. So hopefully, Karen, that helps.
Okay, thanks, Wendy and Alonzo. Thanks for joining us today, Alonzo. And he wants to know, what approaches do you recommend to get a client to understand the importance of these things when they are so focused on burning calories?
I can jump in here. The key thing is the assessment and teach them the model. And when I say teach the model, show them that you have an approach to get them to move better. And you just tie that into their goals. Say, hey, I understand in 10 weeks or 8 weeks, you want to do this. The better I get you to move, the better you're going to be able to do whatever they think it is to burn calories. Now, doesn't mean you can't get them in a pool. Doesn't mean you can't get them on a bike. Doesn't mean you can't get them on an elliptical. Doesn't mean you can't get them on a stair mill. Doesn't mean you can't do the battling rope, shadow boxing, all these things. You just may not be doing plyometrics and burpees and jumps because you know that their body wouldn't withstand that, or running. So again, getting to be active, and then obviously nutrition are the key points.
Right. And if I can add to that, I think oftentimes, and both of you can stop me if I'm wrong, I think we make corrective exercise a thing. We make it into this mythical thing, and it's just really what it is it's a targeted flexibility and strength training program that you should use as part of, if you look at your new templates that are coming out in CPT 7, that goes into your warm up and activation portion of your workout. These are things that you should be doing anyway before the session. So you do that as part of your regular workout. And then, of course, if you're training and you're training responsibly, you're not going to give the client anything that they can't tolerate. Like you're not going to have them jumping and trying to land when they can't control that. So you're going to give them exercises within the limits of their abilities, and you gradually progress them. So there's no reason, if you explain that, hey, this is just part of the warm up, I'm here to get you better. Corrective exercise shouldn't be a barrier to burning calories, getting your sweat on, increasing your performance, whatever it is you and your client have decided that you want to do.
Well, and I want to throw one other thing in here. Again, remember, guys, when you're doing core balance and reactive, you're working on muscles that are very underactive. So when you actually do the 4-2-1 count, like if you're doing a plank, you come up and you're really focusing, having them come up for 3 seconds, go down, and doing that for reps. And then you have them go into like a single leg squat, or balance with reach, and they're on a half foam roller and they're having to maintain that. They're still okay to throw like what I usually term a metabolic blast by putting them on like the rower and having them row for 30 seconds as hard and as fast as they can, and then repeat. So it's okay to throw in, some metabolic piece throughout it. So therefore they're working muscles they need to, they're getting some cardio. And then at that point you're limiting their rest and doing a vertical load. So therefore they are burning more calories with less rest, as long as their body can maintain that.
Outstanding. Okay, so thank you, Wendy and Marty. And again, as always, tell us how to find you on the web.
On the interwebs, right? So email me at wendy.bats@nasm.org, or on Instagram, you can find me at wendy.bats13.
And then for me, marty.miller@nasm.org, and Instagram is dr.martymiller72.
All right. Thank you both. Thanks to everyone who stayed with us the entire time. And thank you, Greg, for keeping it together. And my internet issues notwithstanding, thanks for keeping the entire webinar going. Thanks, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.